thank you for tuning in. I just want to take this opportunity to thank some of our friends. Firstly, all-round tech PR superstars Nelson Bostock. Whether you're an established technology brand or a fast-growing fintech, you need the right team behind you, a team that understands your brand, your purpose, your goals, and can really help you define your narrative and tell your story, the story that matters. These guys tick all of those boxes and more. You can find them at nelsonbostock.com. That's Nelson Bostock with a CK on the end, .com. Highly recommended. I also want to thank Tramshed Tech. We've come down here and they kindly allowed us to use their world-class recording studio facility down here. But they do office space, they do events. I can't recommend them enough. That's Tramshed Tech. And also a big shout out to Be Digital, who make all this possible. Be Digital enable organizations to become lean, agile, and to attract the right talent. That's bedigitaluk.com. Welcome to the show. We wanted to get a really special guest on for Christmas, and this guest ticks that box and some. Kerensa Jennings is the Director of Digital Impact for BT. She's had a remarkable career, a large part of which was in the broadcasting sector, working with legends of broadcasting like David Attenborough, David Frost. She also had a stint working with the royal family as well, which was really interesting to unpack. We talk at length about her current role in BT and all the amazing work that she's involved with there, sort of helping people to become confident and also adept with digital skills and the new digital world we are moving towards and we're already in many respects. Fascinating conversation, a lovely lady, super authentic, great storyteller. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure you will enjoy listening to our conversation as well. It's Kerensa Jennings. Kerensa Jennings, thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem at all. I've been really excited about hearing about all the amazing things you've been doing recently. You've obviously had an amazing career, so I'm looking forward to unpacking that. But why don't we start, if you can just, for people who don't know who you are, if you could just give us maybe an intro to yourself and a bit of an overview of your career and, you know, from point of education right through to where you are now.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm glad you've booked in 18 hours for this recording because I've got a lot. So my name's Kerensa Jennings. I'm BT's Group Director of Digital Impact. And I've been at BT since just before Christmas last year. Before that, I was working at the Royal Household. I was a director there, and I was Chief Executive of the Inspiring Digital Enterprise Award, which is like the digital equivalent of the Duke of Edinburgh Award. Before that, I spent 15 years at the BBC, spent a long time in my television career, working as a television producer mostly and a writer, but then also spending 5 years towards the end of my time at the BBC as the BBC's head of strategic delivery. And sort of going back to the start, really, you know, having gone to school and got a really lovely offer from Oxford University, which was kind of an amazing thing at the time because I went to a very large comprehensive school with 1,800 kids, and neither of my parents had A-levels or went to university. Got this offer to go to Oxford. If I got 1A and 1B, I'd be able to go to Oxford. And so it was amazing. I got 2 A's and a B and couldn't quite believe it. So I got to go to Oxford, studied modern languages there. So I studied French and German. And at Oxford, they specialise in literature. So what I would say to you is that the one thing that's kind of marked out my whole career is a real passion for storytelling and for stories. I absolutely love literature, I love stories. So having left university, my first job was over in Japan. I spent a year there living on the top of a hill in the middle of nowhere in a beautiful little village where all my friends were apple growers and rice farmers. I was teaching English at a couple of different local schools and teaching aerobics at night time. And then when I came back, I got a job. I was really lucky to get a job at ITN, which is the organisation that produces the news for ITV. It's now called ITV News. And I spent 4 years there. And my first job there, my shift started at 10 o'clock at night and went through till 10 o'clock in the morning. And I was working on the big breakfast news. And this was part of the Big Breakfast show, and it was presented by Peter Smith at the time. And so it was Chris Evans and Gabby Roslin were the presenters of the day. And it was amazing being part of something like that. So I was originally a runner, which meant that I used to pick off the printouts and then from the printer at the last possible moment and distribute them to the presenter, the auto cue operator, the vision mixer, the director. And it was just so exciting. I was sort of living the dream working at Oxford. And I swiftly moved on. I actually very, very luckily got the chance to write the weather one day when the person who wrote the weather normally wasn't able to go to work because they weren't very well. And they said to me, well, Kerensa, are you able to write? Can you write? And I was like, oh, I'll definitely have a go. And of course, what they didn't know is that I'd actually spent a couple of years in my life when I was still at school, actually being paid for some of my writing with my local newspaper. I used to be a weekend reporter. So I used to love the writing side of it. So fast forwarding through all of that, I ended up being part of the launch team at 5 News, which was amazing, such a privilege. You know, when the next terrestrial channel launched in the UK, I was part of the team that was part of the 5 News team. From then I went to Sky, worked at Live at 5, which was their big block of daytime television on Sky News. And from that, I became editor of Breakfast with Frost. So I became the programme editor of what was at the time the most written about and most talked about current affairs show in the UK. And from then I was headed up news specials for a few years. I was the election results editor. I had a turn working at the natural history unit, and I made a paleontology series, went to David Attenborough's house, filmed with him for a couple of the episodes. And that broadly brings you up to speed with where I am today.
Wow, what a career you had. That's amazing. But it's just so many directions to go in there and so many things to unpack. The things that stood out for me, you worked with the legendary David Frost then.
Oh, he was amazing. He was absolutely sharp and had an incredible mind. I absolutely loved working with him. And just to give you a sort of sense of his generosity of spirit and his talent, I remember I was in charge of the programme over the 9/11 period, and I was making the first show after 9/11 happened. And it was an incredibly emotional time to be working in broadcasting. You had such a responsibility to tell the world what was going on. And so I was curating the show. So your job really is to book the best possible guests you can gather to help tell the story and to help inform the nation about what's going on, and to try to unpack what was going in probably the most important geopolitical event in living memory.
Yeah.
And
sorry, Kerensa, was it the program that was on a Sunday morning?
Yes, that's right.
I hated that program because I was at the age, right, where I wanted to watch cartoons, and that was the end of it. And my granddad used to stay with my grandparents on the weekends, and he used to insist on watching Frost on a Sunday morning, and I resented him for it. But years later, I saw Frost Nixon, and I actually realised how much of a great journalist and a great interviewer he was. So I thought I'd just chuck that really bad anecdote in there. But it just fills me with dread coming down on a Sunday morning and having to watch politics programs when I wanted to watch, Super Ted or whatever I was into.
The cruelty of your grandfather. Through boring old current affairs.
No, that is amazing though. I mean, I didn't know that you were on the Big Breakfast as well. That was a bit of a phenomenon when I was growing up. Talk us through that experience then.
Yes, well, I was on the news bit, so we were in a different building. We were based at Gray's Inn Road, which is where ITN is still to this day currently based. So we would be kind of squirted in to do the news bits of the Planet 24 was the production company behind the Big Breakfast, and it was just anarchy and absolutely brilliant, and all the more wonderful for it. So in those days, you'd have to write something called the Slug, and the Slug was the word or two that was behind the presenter's face. And you would always have a huge amount of fun, even when you were writing the news, trying to create these kind of double entendres that you could kind of get away with, that it would be all right to get away with. So hugely fun. The writing side of it, I was going to mention that this is where, back to David Frost, that where the 9/11 show in particular was something that really sticks in my mind when it comes to thinking about him, because on that Saturday the day before the show, as you rightly say, the Sunday was the morning of the show. I was really struggling writing the introduction to the programme, and I had a call with David, and he was saying, "How's it all going?" And I said, "I'm really pleased with the people we've got. I think we've got a great show lined up, and I think we're going to be, making really good television. But I'm struggling with the introduction." And he said to me, "Did you happen to read the front page of The Guardian today?" And it was Ian McEwan, the wonderful writer. And he had written an essay, and he'd actually been in New York at the time of 9/11 happening. And it was his reflections, and it was incredibly moving. And David suggested to me, "Why don't we just read a little bit of that? We can appropriately credit it. It's Guardian, it's Ian McEwan, but let's do that." And it was amazing when he did it on the Sunday morning. The whole of the studio went completely quiet. You could have heard a pin drop, and
Wow.
he just read some of those words, and we all had tears in our eyes. It was just so moving, and that to me said a lot about the legend that is David Frost. He absolutely had the good grace to see talent in someone else and not want to have to own something himself in any shape or form. It was like that generosity of spirit and capturing exactly the right tone on what was an incredibly important day, for the BBC to be telling the story.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really powerful. I wanted to ask you about your time working with the Royals as well. Talk us through that. What did you learn from that experience?
Well, I was based in Buckingham Palace for a few years, which was amazing. And, it's a completely surreal, absolutely wonderful privilege to have the chance to do that in your life. I mean, I've been very lucky, really, because I'm working at BBC and for the Royal Household and now at BT. All three of these institutions are things I grew up with and knew about since I was an incredibly little girl. But I was incredibly lucky. I would be able to go through the front door every day, and the policeman would call me Mum, and we would be you'd just be let in. You'd show your pass, and you'd be let in. And the entrance, when you're looking at Buckingham Palace on the right-hand side, is the entrance I used to go in, and it's called the Privy Purse entrance. And every single time I went into work, I couldn't help but pinch myself. I just couldn't hardly believe it. It was just amazing and such a privilege. Just one of the most extraordinary, wonderful experiences of my life, and got the opportunity to go to some incredible events, attend some incredible dinners, meet some incredible people. And obviously, although it's hard to imagine, there are actually office rooms in the palace. And so I was based in an office room in the palace. And of course, all the grand sort of ballrooms you hear about and the things that you might see photographs of, that's not where I was working, but it was actually in the building of the palace.
Right. Wow. Okay. So when you look back through this period then, but what were the sort of key milestones in your career, do you think?
Oh, there have been so many. And I have to say, I think it's a lot to do with the people that you meet and the networks you build and the connections you make. I mean, in terms of things like key highlights, for example, working on a program with Nelson Mandela was one of the key highlights of my life. It was an incredible privilege getting to meet Nelson Mandela. He was a bit of a hero of mine. But there's always those little sort of sparks of magic that come into your life, and it can be the right connection or the right conversation or the right person that kind of sparks you on. I mean, I've been incredibly lucky in my life. When I think back about my family background, and my granddad worked in the dockyard in Plymouth and made the warships. My uncles all worked in the dockyard. My father left school at 15 and got himself an apprenticeship and worked in the dockyard at Plymouth. My mum and dad moved to Surrey when, before I was born, as a way of kind of getting closer to the bright lights of London. And it's very humbling when you look back and, someone like my granddad is such, I mean, he's unfortunately, he died a number of years ago now, but such a humble, lovely, lovely person. And for him, the pride in his life was keeping a nice clean house and making sure there was food on the table, and when I think about, if you heard, oh, she went to Oxford and she worked at the Palace, that makes me sound like a particular type of person, if you know what I mean. Like I've come from a certain background, and I just don't stop pinching myself really. And even now, I mean, I'm probably in a position of influence with the job I'm doing at BT, but I'm still just me, you know. I'm still, you know, in my heart of hearts, I'm still the little girl from Camberley who went to Collingwood School, and you know, and all of those things. Everything about you makes you you. So I think, you know, I suppose it depends how much detail you want to go into, but it's all about the individuals I met and the connections that I made. That's kind of the key thing that's been the thread of my life.
Certainly. Okay, but one thing I think that probably does stand out in your career, you were always very good at telling stories. Okay, you've written a book, Seas of Snow. You're, you know, a fiction book. We can talk about that in a minute. But let's talk about storytelling, okay? Because I think this is a really important, almost like a lost art, a dark art, if you like, something that doesn't get valued enough by society, in my opinion. Tell us about why you think you're a good storyteller, and what is a good storyteller?
That's a lovely, lovely question. Thank you. People need connections, and people need to feel like they connect. And I think stories are one of the most wonderful ways of helping people feel like they belong. If you read a story, whether it's poetry or whether it's a fiction short story, whether it's prose or long form, you can whisk yourself away, and just for a moment, if it's really beautifully written and if it hooks into something you care about, you can forget about the troubles of your life. You can escape the traumas and torments of whatever you might be going on. You know, you can be forgetting about all the worries of the day. And just for a moment, for that time when you're reading, you whisk yourself away. And this is the wonderful invention of audiobooks as well these days. You know, people can listen as well. And what we're doing now with your podcast, it's just fantastic to be able to listen as well as to read. But it's about creating space for your imagination. And, you know, in terms of why I think I'm a good storyteller, I think it's because the words just sort of tumble out a little bit. I don't have to over-engineer it. When I was writing Seas of Snow, I knew the kind of scaffolding I wanted to build in terms of the story structure. But it was a case of sort of almost, they call it automatic writing. You sit down and the story starts unfolding in front of you. You can't wait to start writing again, because the story is going to tell you how it's going to unfold. And you're almost like so excited because you want to know what's happening next, and you're writing it. And it's through the process of writing that I also process a lot of my own feelings. And with Seas of Snow in particular, that was a big act of catharsis as well, to do with something that I'd gone through previously. But the actual art of writing, I have to write every day. I have to do some form of writing every day. It needs to come out of me. And on days when I don't have the ability to write sort of, you know, anything long and involved, and most days these days, particularly with work being so busy, I don't have the chance to do lots and lots of long and involved writing. I still have to do a little bit, because it's my way of feeling a connection to a kind of almost like an other self. It's how I process my thinking. It's how I make sense of the world. And I read a lot. I love reading poetry. I love reading prose just for inspiration and to get that sense of feeling alive. It takes you somewhere else.
It's an outlet, isn't it? I suppose it's an outlet for you to kind of vent this creative energy that you've built up through this really serious world that we live in. So, but yeah, I've not read Seas of Snow. Okay, in fact, you know, admittedly, I'm not much of a fiction reader. I'm a big book reader, but not fiction. But that's something I need to change. I think I did used to, you know, I struggled to get into a fiction book, if that makes sense. But I think I just didn't see the value of it. I always sort of wanted something which was true. I think as I'm getting older, I'm changing my opinion on that. But I just wanted to ask you though, Kerensa, what was your inspiration to write a psychological thriller? I mean, what for that story? It was not about that genre, sorry, about that specific story that you told. What was your inspiration for that?
Well, that's thank you. I mean, that is something which is incredibly dear to my heart. So a number of years ago, I was in charge of the news and current affairs coverage of the Soham investigation. and I was embedded with Cambridgeshire Constabulary, they were looking into building the evidence case against Ian Huntley, who was the caretaker who murdered 2 little schoolgirls in the village of Soham in Cambridgeshire. And so I was with them every step of the way as they were collecting evidence, and they amassed a huge amount of evidence. And I was on that process with them when the evidence went to the Crown Prosecution Service, and then went to the court, and then I spent the time at the trial at the Old Bailey, sitting behind this man who did this horrible thing to these 2 girls. And the process of being part of that case and seeing the evidence and things triggering in me about just finding it incredibly difficult. It was a very traumatic case to get to cover. And this person was clearly, I mean, he's a psychopath, and I was really interested in the mind and motives of a psychopath. So I wanted to get under the skin of that a little bit more. So that was the original inspiration. And through wanting to understand better the mind and motives of the way the human mind works and the way we think, our drivers, our motivators, why is it that so many people in life alive today are psychopaths, but very, very few of them are motivated to commit monstrous acts? You know, psychopaths live with us. There's lots of them around. Lots of people are psychopaths in business, for example. It doesn't make them evil people. It doesn't make them commit monstrous acts. So I was wondering, what is it that makes someone do that? So I was exploring whether evil is born or made, and that's the essence of the story I'm trying to tell. And to your point about reading fiction, lots of people don't read fiction. And the way I wrote my book, it's very sort of cinematographic. So it's in very short chapters, and it's almost like little video scenes. So because I come from a kind of television background, I always think in scenes. So if you were to dip into it, you'd find that, you know, the chapters are quite short and sweet, so you don't have to kind of linger on them for it. It's not Tolstoy by any stretch. And you can sort of dip into it rather than one of those books that has extremely sort of long chapters. So that's my particular style. But that was the original inspiration, and the reason I said it was catharsis is because it was me getting in touch with my own feelings. So my story takes the inspiration of that case, but I transpose the story to 1950s England, to Northeast England, in fact. And I have one little girl, not 2, in the 1950s. And it's the story of her life when she meets this very evil man. And she uses reading and writing and poetry to escape the traumas of her life. So it's sort of all interweaving with some of the themes that play out in my own life as well.
Oh, right. Okay. Brilliant. Well, look, I mean, amazing that you wrote a book, you know, on such a difficult subject to contextualize. It must be a massive sort of, what would you call it, like a literary challenge, you know, to put in your thoughts onto paper in such a, you know, in such a way. Any sort of plans to write another book? You know, are you working on anything right now?
Yes, in fact, I have a few different projects underway. My only enemy at the moment is time. So I have got a book that's called The Subsea Portal that will be coming out next year. And I'm also working on another psychological thriller called Edge of Rain. And I have a collection of poems that's coming out the year after. And I'm also, the other thing I'm going to be doing next year is calling for submissions. I'm going to curate an anthology of writing called Unseen Voices. And this is a collection which I want to do to basically give people who have never been published before, particularly of ethnic minority backgrounds, the opportunity to have a voice. And that could be a piece of polemic, it could be a piece of poetry, it could be a piece of fiction, it could be a short story, it could be an excerpt of something. But I want to surface and find some of the best writing out there today and put it all in a kind of try before you buy kind of book, so that people get the opportunity to sample writing that's never been seen before. So it's called Unseen Voices, and that will be coming out next year.
That sounds really exciting, the last project for sure. Let's talk about 9 to 5, Kerensa. It looks like you're an amazing role at BT, doing some really great stuff. So first of all, what's Digital Impact, okay? And what is your role? What's the purpose of your role in BT right now?
Yes, well, thank you. Well, at BT, the actual purpose of the company is we connect for good. That's how they define, well, that's how we define what we stand for. My 9 to 5, generally most days looks more like an 8 to 8, to be fair. Yes, 8 to 8. I'm sort of normally at my desk by around 8ish, normally starting emails just after 6 and often still doing emails after 10 o'clock at night. So it's by far and away not the most restful experience of my life. But digital impact, it's about how you help, you know, every man, woman and child in this country make the most of life in the digital world. So it's about helping make sure they get the right kind of skills to make the most of life. Digital skills is not something that lots of people necessarily will lean into or feel like they can make space in their day to learn as such. But if you understand what is it they want to do, what is it they need to do, then my job is to make sure that they can find out how to do it.
Right.
So, you know, in the case of small business owners, for example, how do you connect your routes to market? How do you take your business online? How do you make the most of collaboration tools? And how do you use the enhance your productivity using digital, saving time, money and energy? And with people who are breaking into the world of work or looking for work because they found themselves unexpectedly redundant. It's about thinking, how do you upskill to be the most attractive proposition possible in the digital marketplace, and how do you actually use the digital marketplace? What are the tips and tricks you can use to find the types of jobs that you might want? So it's around that kind of, how do you optimize and how do you make just people, whatever they're doing, whoever they are, wherever they live, whatever their background, how do you help them unlock their potential and make the most of life?
So you essentially provide BT customers with a kind of like an advisory and support service. Is that what it is? Is it some sort of hands-on sort of, you know, enablement support function? Is that what you provide?
It's a brilliant way of describing it, actually. I think I might just nick that and put that as my tagline. But it's not quite as simple as working just with customers. This is for anybody, whether you're a BT customer or not a BT customer. It's for absolutely everybody in the UK. The program I run is called BT Skills for Tomorrow, and we have lots of completely free resources in the website. So you can look up BT Skills for Tomorrow. There's a big, vibrant webinar program for people who work in small businesses or want to learn about digital marketing or growth mindsets, for example, or breaking into the job market. And there's programs for children, and there's programs for people with low and no digital skills. So there's a whole series of different programs and initiatives, some of which help support home life. And that's particularly for families, mums and dads, grandparents, carers, and people with low and no digital skills. And then on the other side, we've got work life, and that's supporting job seekers and people who work in small businesses. So it's a variety of things. So we work in partnership with a number of different organisations. So one of our flagship partnerships, for example, is something called Fast Futures. And we've collaborated with Avado Learning and with Lennon Chalcott, together with the NHS, Legal & General, Barclays, a whole host of brilliant companies, AstraZeneca are in there, and we're helping put a 3-month programme together for people who are looking to break into the job market, equipping them with employability and digital skills. It's a 3-month programme that's completely free. And wow. we BT and all the other employers are providing personal mentoring to the job seekers and mock interviews, as well as course content. We're also working with Digital Boost, which is a very vibrant partnership we're doing in collaboration also with Google. And we are working to help support small businesses with mentoring around things like staying safe online, cybersecurity, digital routes to market, digital marketing, advertising, cybersecurity, etc. And in addition to that, on the portal, we've negotiated completely free access to learning by companies like Google Digital Garage and LinkedIn Learning. So we act as a kind of portal for some of the best courses out there. So I run all the stuff that in respect to how anybody can find it, it's all just completely free. You do not have to be a BT customer to benefit. And we've got things, whatever, cradle to grave, whatever age or stage you are, we've got all kinds of resources to try to help you make the most of life.
Brilliant. That's incredible. So just so obviously we have a lot of listeners who work for small businesses and want to improve their own digital skills for them, for their own job search endeavors, or career changes or whatever. How do they access this content then? How do they get onto the portal?
I would say the simplest thing to do is Google BT Skills for Tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then I'd click onto the work life section, and that's where you'll instantly be landing on a cornucopia of different modules to help you. And also there's a webinar section that you can just click on the webinar tab, sign up onto our Eventbrite page, and then start attending our free webinars.
Yeah.
That's one of the ways to do it. The other thing I recommend people do is look up, again, just Google BT Tech Tips. If you Google BT Tech Tips, that will take you to a landing page, and this will take you to a campaign we did earlier in lockdown, which is where we actually used BT, what would have been sort of advertising revenue, to actually make a series of films. And we did ad break takeovers in the middle of This Morning and in the middle of the early evening news on ITV. And they were each fronted by a household name. So you had David Williams, you had Gareth Southgate, Fern Cotton, Claire Balding, Marvin and Rochelle, Marcus Rashford was in there.
Oh, he's going to be Prime Minister soon, I think, Marcus Rashford, isn't he?
I think you might be right.
That's interesting, though, just providing children with digital skills. How far is the education system going to prepare people for this digital world? And I understand you're involved with the Fast Futures program. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, exactly. So Fast Futures is the 3 months online free program that is that collaboration with the NHS and AstraZeneca and Barclays.
Right.
All those amazing companies together, but it's very specifically for 18 to 22-year-olds.
Right, gotcha.
So it's kind of after school, but it's also recognizing that actually in the schooling environment, lots of people are coming out the other side not having been equipped with those digital skills that they need for the modern workplace. Within the schooling environment, we work with Computing at School, which is an offshoot of British Computer Society, and we create a program called Barefoot, and that's helping people at primary school learn digital skills, and particularly around computing skills and computational thinking. But I think you're right. The schooling environment, I mean, particularly right now, it's so challenging, and there's so much uncertainty about what's going on in terms of homeschooling and whether people can go to school. If teachers fall sick, I mean, I know anecdotally one of her best friends is a teacher in London in a school in East London. And there's been times when in her class she's had up to 80 kids, trying to teach 80 kids at once, just in the middle of lockdown,
Wow.
So it's incredibly challenging. So I think the work teachers do is nothing short of heroic. And it's really difficult for society, for the world, for the government, for us to be expecting them to also suddenly teach computing skills in amongst everything else that they're doing. I mean, they've got the child's welfare to look after, and also the pastoral care and the subject matter that they might be teaching geography or history or maths or English or whatever. And computing doesn't come naturally to everybody. So the computing curriculum was introduced in 2014 to mixed reviews. And we're just doing our bit to try to make sure that children do get the opportunity to come out the other side. And the Work Ready program that we run is the program we run, which supports job seekers, and Fast Futures is our link into that program you mentioned. And we run a load of webinars for job seekers, and we're creating a string of digital content as well that will be like a kind of vibrant mini curriculum to help people. And we're also building ideas for how we connect into schools with that Work Ready ethos. So it's sort of the older teenagers. How do we inspire them to think about the digital marketplace? And to be honest with you, in my view, it's less about individual functional technical skills and more about a kind of a problem-solving mindset and being able to be resilient. Because in all honesty, the hardware and the software is likely to keep changing. So what really matters is how we can help your confidence, how we can unlock your potential so that you're less scared if you're hit with a new piece of hardware or a new piece of software, and it's less intimidating. I think that's where we can play a really valuable role as kind of connectors and inspirers, is helping people just get a lot more comfortable with some of the general principles of technology, and feeling a lot more, you know, inspired with confidence.
That really is it, though, isn't it? I mean, I think, like, I do it myself. I mean, when I've got to navigate to like a new piece of software, if I can't master it in 10 minutes, I think, oh, I can't be bothered. I'm just going to go back to the one I know. Do you know what I mean? And it's, and then just think, and then you kind of remember, you kind of, you know, sort of tell yourself or something. You just sort of say, well, obviously I've got to persevere, and over time I will learn it, and then I will master it, you know? And I think that's what it is a lot of the time, isn't it? I think people get intimidated by an interface because there's lots of options on there. And what you've got to think of is just what you've got to say to yourself sometimes is, you know, this is going to take time to learn, just like anything else. But I don't know what it is about software interfaces. They kind of intimidate people, certainly people who are not computer literate. So I think teaching confidence and teaching people to just be robust, accept that things take time to learn, and that's okay. That's all the battle you need to. That's the battle you need to win, really. Because once people think like that, they can learn anything, can't they?
I completely agree. I think that's the secret sauce. It's about confidence, and it's about resilience and adaptability. You know, people hate feeling thick. We all, I mean, I get really frustrated if there's a, you know, if say one of my apps has undergone an upgrade, you know, and then I'm back into it and suddenly it's doing something different. I mean, my iPhone the other day, suddenly the way that you set the alarm completely changed, and there was about 27 different ways to set the alarm. I was like, I just want it to be back to normal and nice and easy. And so we all get so frustrated when things take too long, or you can't figure it out. And it can be particularly, I think, very, very difficult for sort of adults in the digital world now who haven't grown up as digital natives and suddenly find themselves having to use all these tools. And they are absolute like ninja rockets at what they do for a living, but suddenly they're faced with something that they suddenly have to do, like during lockdown, everybody having to do video conferencing and things and learning new tools and techniques. It's absolutely horrible to feel I just don't know what to do, or my kid knows better how to do this than I do.
Well, I got a little story for you on that. I went up the stairs the other day, and my 2-year-old daughter, who can't really talk yet, was she was standing by the Alexa going, Alexa, play Let It Go. Alexa, let it go. She can't even talk, and yet she can communicate with Alexa. But that's a digital native for you, I suppose, isn't it? But I think voice is going to change a lot of things, though, isn't it? I think voice control on electrical devices is going to be a bit of a game changer as the AI kicks in and it gets more advanced.
Yeah, so interesting you should say that, because one of the things I do, I chair the digital inclusion group at the DCMS Tackling Loneliness Network on behalf of BT. And we have got very, very excited about the possibilities of voice-enabled tech to help people feel less lonely, and particularly with older and more vulnerable people, what might be the ways of helping them remember to take their medication, or just checking in, like, how are you today? And just ways of kind of monitoring triggers to just double check that people are all right, you know, mental well-being as well as physical well-being.
Absolutely. I mean, think of it in a practical terms. I mean, if it is an elderly person who suffers with maybe some sort of underlying health condition, but they live alone, if they start having pains and they can't get, whereas before they'd have to get to the phone, if they can shout, Alexa, I'm struggling, I think I'm having a heart attack, and Alexa calls the ambulance, that's a great use case for voice. So, you know, for voice technology, isn't it? So I think voice is definitely the way forward for a number of things, especially controlling my TV because my remote doesn't work. So it's great. That's what I'm using it for right now. But I think what I wanted to come on to then is technology innovation, because you're really at the cutting edge of this right now. I mean, BT obviously have got a big R&D department. There's a lot of, you know, you're in the middle of this type of the things, the innovation, the stuff that's going on right now in terms of UK tech innovation in general. What are you most excited about? We talked about voice. What else are you excited about in terms of tech innovation right now?
Well, I was really surprised when I joined BT, and it's one of those things about BT. It's such a cool tech company. And I don't know if it necessarily has that kind of aura about it, but when you're on the inside, you suddenly realize it blows your mind. You know, BT have got more AI patents than any other company in the UK.
Wow, I wouldn't have thought that.
Yeah, I was blown away by it. And, you know, when I listened to some of my colleagues in the innovation departments talking about some of the technologies they're experimenting with, particularly around how you optimize digital products, it's really, really exciting. I mean, the thing I'm most kind of interested in, I suppose, is around how we handle data privacy and how we make that balance between, you know, I love the idea of voice-enabled tech and all those things, but how do you then strike the balance so that things aren't invasive and people have control of their own data and their own privacy? And I'm really excited about the possibilities of how you know, different types of technology can link into healthcare. You know, imagine a world when you know, you might be in an incredibly remote part of the UK, quite vulnerable, not in today's world very easily accessible to, you know, the latest medication or things that you might need, or even consultations with a GP. And then there's so much emerging at the moment around about operations being able to be curated by a surgeon, for example, maybe being in Australia, telling via Skype or via Zoom or via Teams or whatever, another surgeon who's actually performing the operation somewhere in the remotest, deepest, darkest parts of I don't know, the Black Country somewhere, here in the UK, and walking them through how to do a piece of revolutionary, operations that they've never done before. That kind of breaking the barriers and using drones technology to be able to, in an emergency situation, give people the medication they need, like within minutes, within hours. That kind of converged, it's a real kind of spilling out of that idea of the converged network, is like how the infrastructure can spill in and out of each other in the digital world, where lots of different technologies can converge. So it's a kind of different definition of convergence to what we had back in the sort of, I guess in the 90s. It's a different way of looking at the world, but the spillover between different tech, how can AI integrate with virtual reality and mixed reality and using the kind of what we now understand a lot better about gamification and how we introduce that into technology, I think is really, really, really exciting as well. And how to improve UX and UI. We both talked about how awful it is when you're using tech that isn't obvious and it's very difficult to use. You know, I think it's really vital that people who work in technology think carefully about accessibility, about the different types of real people that will be using the products, and try not to overload. You know, I don't know if you've heard of Occam's razor, and this kind of this concept that people overload. If it's possible to add an extra bit of functionality, they'll add it in just because of the fun of it. Or, you know, you can sort of like pulling a piece of wool out of a kind of a jumper with a hole. It just keeps going and going and going. You could keep adding and adding and adding, but actually, I think the trick is to abstract. And the simpler you can make something, the more of a pleasure and a joy it is to use in terms of the user. So yeah, I think it's a combination of AI, data, cutting edge tech, MR, AR, and how all of that converges.
Automation, for example, in AI potentially could replace, you know, manual entry, you know, a bookkeeping and accountancy jobs. It could replace, you know, other jobs, all sorts of jobs, you know, manufacturing jobs or whatever. So, I mean, is that a shift or is that a problem? What's your thoughts on that, Kerensa?
I think, you know, the rapid pace of technology means that we as human beings are also rapidly evolving. You know, way back in the day, there were stable boys and horses, and everybody used to travel everywhere by horseback. You know, and still,
that was a while ago.
it was a while ago, but people continue to be employed. So with the way technology is evolving, I think there are certain technologies that will come in that will enhance productivity and will be revolutionary in terms of workforce efficiency. That doesn't mean to say you don't need people. In fact, it's the reverse. You still need people. You know, technology without people doesn't really. I just don't see it. I just don't see it manifesting. You need people to control it. You need people to input to it. what I would love to see, for example, we talked about AI earlier, but we need to eliminate the kind of biases that can creep into AI. Thinking, we are in the middle of sort of Black Lives Matter, a really important repositioning and reframing of what we need to be talking about in society, and rethinking the way that we have a relationship in society. Everybody matters. And so doing our best to eliminate those biases. It's not about there being fewer jobs, it's about there being different jobs. So
Yes.
The problem solving skills, the not being afraid of tech, the embracing a sense of confidence around the possibilities of the future. That's what I consider my job to be, is to try to help inspire people with that, because it definitely isn't less jobs, it's different jobs.
Yeah, and people think that this is like a modern phenomenon, don't they? I mean, automation and technology replacing people. But this has been a problem for, well, certainly the last 200 years, probably a lot longer than that. I know the term Luddite comes from this mystical figure called Ned Ludd, who used to destroy machines during the Industrial Revolution. So, that was, sort of the 1800s. So this is not a new thing, is it? And I think over that time showed that things just changed. They didn't, people needed to be employed elsewhere. So surely that's an opportunity. That's exactly what you're trying to do, isn't it? Modernize the workforce. That's your entire purpose, Kerensa, isn't it?
Well, it's about, I would say my purpose is to help people make the most of life, whatever they happen to be doing.
But on a macro level, you're essentially, you're modernizing the workforce. That's what you're doing, surely.
Well, I suppose it's helping people be able to make the most of life. How would I describe it? I mean, workforce modernization is probably not quite how I would capture it, although that might be one of the outputs. It's about equipping people with the confidence and the skills to be able to do the jobs of both today and tomorrow, whatever those jobs are. And I think the best lesson you can take really is kind of looking backwards, look at history, look at all the changes in tech. We used to have flints. Flints evolved into knives. Knives evolved into electric power saws. Technology endlessly evolves, and there's a lot of technology which is incredibly exciting and incredibly brilliant. There's some technology which I think is less exciting, and some technology can be more boring. But having said that, I think broadly it's about that sense of extraordinary opportunity and optimism. I think it's really important that people feel in control of their tech, in control of their data, and in control of their futures. Through my work at BT, I want to help people protect and connect. I want to help them protect their families, their homes, their children, their businesses, and I want to connect them to the possibilities of the future, connect them to their unlocking their own potential, and connect them to the lives they could have if they would feel a little bit scared and intimidated by technology.
Yeah, no, well said. I think that's really important, by the way, as well. I think I was kind of probing you with workforce modernization, but I think that would be a good side effect of what you're doing for sure. So I wanted to talk about coronavirus and the lockdown period. We've had a crazy year. It feels to me that a lot of things which were going to happen anyway have just been accelerated. I know there's been a big narrative on that. I think that's quite established, isn't it? What have you seen in terms, what's changed this year? And I'm talking, and that's a very broad question, a very generalist question, but in the context of your role and BT and the businesses you're working with and the individuals that you're working with, what have you seen in terms of macro trends that have changed and specific things that have stood out for you that have changed this year?
I think two things in particular. One is people are almost forced into situations where they have to try different types of technology in order to do things. And if they don't use the technology, then they can't do the things they want to do. So I think that has really accelerated a sense of confidence growing and people being a little bit less frightened about using tech. I think that is a really, really major one, because if you haven't ever used WhatsApp before and you want to be able to see your family and friends and you're living on your own, then the best way of doing it is connecting to some sort of video device where you can then see them. And it's the most magic thing when you see someone for the first time connecting with a family member that they've not seen. and suddenly it's on video call and they've never done one before. And you hear these lovely stories about people sort of talking to their mum or dad, and all they see is the ear, this sort of thing. So getting to know these little tips and tricks. So I think that sense of confidence is really important. The other one that has drastically accelerated is the use of video conference in the workplace. If you think when Skype was invented, a really, really long time ago, that at the time was designed to revolutionize the working world. There would be less people traveling all over the place to international meetings. You wouldn't need building spaces as much. People would be able to work wherever they wanted to work. Remote working would be a thing. Remote working never caught on in a wholesale way, although of course there's lots and lots of people who have embraced it for many, many years. But this is the gigantic shift that we have seen here, and people are finding it actually paradoxically the side effects of it. We've actually been told at work that if you prefer to have to dial into one of your meetings and put your camera off, that's fine too, because I think people are finding it very draining. I mean, particularly in my working day, most days I have somewhere between 8 and 10 video calls a day. And it's incredibly draining to be looking at a screen and talking to a screen and concentrating in that way. So I think it brings with it both extraordinary possibilities. I love working from home. I love being in my home environment, having access to my tea and my kettle and my cat. That is absolutely fantastic, and it makes me very, very happy. I love seeing my garden. But the draining being on the screen all day is very, very difficult, and not having those idle interventions, just those little accidental happenstance moments with your colleagues where you just learn something new, have a bit of a laugh, chat with each other.
Serendipity, isn't it? I think serendipity is brilliant for creativity. It's this unexpected things happening. It just makes your brain think everything's very scheduled now. Do you not think so? Like I used to cold call people. Now I've got to ask them when I can call. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's just it was going that way anyway. But again, as we said earlier on, it's accelerated that behaviour, I think, a little bit. And there's a lot of good that'll come out of it, but there's also a few things we'll potentially miss, because I think a lot's changed forever, isn't it? Do you agree?
I think so. I think some of the working practices that we're adopting will embed for a long, long time. And people will also, there are some people who've made huge amounts of strides in their businesses. I mean, there's lots of small businesses listening today who've actually opened up opportunities and new routes to market. And some of them are finding they're more needed than ever in a kind of COVID-19 world. So yes, it's about sort of embracing all of that.
Absolutely. What about the office then, Kerensa? What do you think about this whole remote working thing? Is the office dead? Are we all going to be working from home forever? What's going to happen with the office, and how's that going to change?
I think it will depend on different sectors, and I think there will be some sectors that will rush back to wherever they were working before and really crave it and want it, and it will benefit the business. And there will be others where there'll be more of a blended solution. I think it will be sensible to kind of have a blended solution in place, but you do need to bring people together. And I think I worry about this, about the kind of lack of communion in society right now, and those moments of coming together around a sort of shared thing. I was watching an old replay of, I can't remember now whether it was The X Factor or Britain's Got Talent, but one of those ones the other day, and that the lovely sense of whooping and everyone in the audience getting very excited by something together. It's that shared experience. And I think there are some sectors and industries where having shared experience and brainstorming and talking to each other in that serendipitous way that you describe is going to be vital to creating the connections of the future and creating the innovations of the future.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you said that. That just made me think of things like the Who Shot Phil Mitchell thing. Yes. Do you know what I mean? And the famous snooker match in 1984 with Steve Day. Something like 20 million Brits stayed up and watched that. Everyone was talking about it the next day. The Phil Mitchell thing, or that's not going to happen anymore, is it? People watch things in Netflix in their own time now. So we'll miss that, won't we? I think.
Yeah, well, that's why I think it's so important that sport comes back. You know, sport is
Yes,
one of those
that's
things that
true.
really unites us as human beings, and
Mm.
there are certain live shows. I mean, I was talking to someone from the BBC the other day who said that 77% of all broadcasting on the BBC is still watched live. And that really shocked me, because I
Yeah,
thought most people are on catch up these days. But of course, there's huge amounts of people across the UK who do just love switching on the telly and watching it when they feel like it. But yeah,
definitely.
coming together for those shared moments, that's what I feel we as a society are in danger of losing from our grasp at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously it's a difficult time right now. There's a lot of companies, a lot of small companies really struggling. You know, obviously you're a leader in your field. What sort of advice do you give to businesses to try and prop them up? What sort of motivational advice do you give them right now?
Do you mean in terms of how they lead their teams,
Lead,
or?
yeah, sorry, yeah. You know, in terms of how they lead their teams and keep working away to get out of this, you know, to sort of have faith that things are going to turn around, and how potentially how they can diversify in things as well. Well, what are you telling business owners and leaders? What are you saying to them right now?
What I'm trying to do is do a lot of listening. So I would advise anyone who is in charge of a team to try to make space to try to listen to what's on their mind, and ask them, how are you? But not in a trite, I don't really mind what you say kind of way. In a, I really, really want to know how you are, because I think particularly, 1 in 4 people in the UK have mental health challenges. And I think that's only going to get worse through the current period. So I think keeping an eye on your people, making sure that they have your back, you have their back, and you're really watching out for when someone's struggling, trying to keep an eye on workloads, trying to make sure that people have space to think, space to grow, space to be themselves in their own family environments as well, because work and life is bleeding into each other at the moment, and it's hard to get those barriers. So I take it as my responsibility as a leader to try to make sure that the people working with me and for me understand that they must stop. You mustn't be doing this around the clock. Have a
Yes.
moment. One of the directors at BT last week, we were in the middle of a big corporate meeting, and we ended slightly early. And he said, "You know what? I want you all right now to just go away and do something that you wouldn't have done if if this meeting had ended at the time it was supposed to end." And so there I was in the middle of the day, and I got my coat and I sewed on some loose buttons that I needed to do, which I've been putting off for ages. And then everybody shared their photographs about what they did. Somebody gave their dog a sort of fur trim. Somebody else made a Lego Star Trek thing, and everybody did something different just in that short gap of precious time. And what that leader did was, his guy called Ed Petter, he's our corporate affairs director. He empowered everybody to just have a moment, just do something for yourself. And so I think having those moments where you listen, where you empower people, and where you allow them to be themselves, I think is important now more than ever.
That is brilliant. I love that. I'm going to do that, by the way. I'm going to steal that one. Okay, so let's end on this then, Kerensa. Thank you for all this amazing detail you've given us and all these amazing stories. But I wanted to ask you, in terms of the lockdown period's been difficult for everyone. But have you read any good books, any stories, any anecdotes, any videos you've seen? Is anything that's inspired you recently or this year that typifies the lockdown period for you, or whatever?
Yeah, actually, do you know what? There was a wonderful, wonderful book I read that was recommended. I always like to read Good Housekeeping magazine, and I like their book recommendations. So that tells you a little bit about how very, very old I am. But there we go. I love that magazine. And one of their book recommendations was Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Obum. I don't know how you pronounce his surname. Tuesdays with Morrie, and it's a memoir. So it's a story about a guy and his former professor, and he goes back to see his former professor while his professor has a terminal illness, and it's about their conversations. And the tears were streaming down my face when I was reading it, which I am somebody that cries easily with certain types of music or certain types of scenes in films. I am prone to a little tear, but often when I'm reading books, I don't actually cry. So I found myself really crying reading this. It's beautiful. It's beautifully written. It's incredibly thoughtful. There's a lot of things about it that connected me with the reality today and what matters. I found it incredibly inspiring.
Yeah, so it's a memoir, so it's obviously a true account of. Oh wow, okay. Well, I'll have to check that out. That sounds really powerful. But Kerensa, we've overran, which was inevitable. But look, I really enjoyed this. I love talking to you. You've been a great guest. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you, Gareth. It's lovely to speak to you, lovely to meet you, and I can't wait to listen to more of your guests. You've recruited some lovely, wonderful people, and thank you so much for making me part of it.
Thanks, Kerensa. Thanks for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast.
Thank you. Bye.